Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This morning I'm looking at a book from Amnesty International, and it's an important book because it's dealing with one of the most serious issues facing society generally across the globe. The title of the book is Combating Torture and Other Ill Treatment, a Manual for Action. Now, it's been updated by Amnesty International, and one of the people involved whose name I have included is Deborah Long, although she's just part, I understand, of a team of people who have contributed. The publication comes from Amnesty International in agreement and collaboration with the University of Bristol and their Human Rights Implementation Centre. All the details, of course, are on the amnesty.org website. Now, Elizabeth and I talked about the book, and for our book review title, we said the following. We've given it a title: Combating Global Torture and Other Barbarities, Amnesty's Plan for Action. Now, before I go into what we've said about the book, there's a lot of information I just want to show you and share with you now. There is the front of the book, there is the spine, and there is the back. Now, if I take it back a little bit, you can see there's quite a lot of detail concerning what the contents of the book are. I've repeated a little bit. You can see Amnesty's logo and the University of Bristol's logo there. This is the book itself anyway. It runs, it's a paperback, 322 pages. One of the problems is the typeface is quite small, and for people with my eyesight problems, not the easiest thing to read. There's no index at the back, but it, as I say, 324 pages. The front, there's a lot of detail about Amnesty, first-class organisation. Delighted to be able to help them by reviewing this work. Those are the acknowledgements, and then that is the list. It's structured into chapters, paragraph numbering, and parts. So there is, in fact, further reading right at the beginning. Then there are standards and abbreviations used, then a foreword and an introduction, and so on. Then you can see the various chapter headings as we run through. There are 7 chapters in total, and in fact there are covering all of the various points that are made. I think the further reading is also very important because we are looking at global issues here as part of Amnesty's general approach. Those are the abbreviations. Quite important to know about because there are a number of different abbreviations depending on which country you are looking at. Protocols are mentioned, of course, as well. You can see the various other things there. Then there's a foreword by Juan Emendez. Now, I did actually read this in some detail. It's a very important foreword, but it is long, and you've got to think a little bit about what he's saying. But it is actually very, very useful commentary on what the book is about. Then there is a main introduction, which you then have, and then you get straight into the structure of the book itself. What you've got is paragraph numbering, which you can see for ease of reference to find things. There are, of course, quite a lot of footnotes. Again, I would say this is not an A4 size book. It's a paperback, and I did find the typeface a little bit not as easy to read as I like, but there again I do tend to have, because I present a great deal of stuff, I do tend to have the words quite large so I can actually see what I'm reading. I'm also getting a bit old. Now, what do we say about this book? Well, I've said a lot about Amnesty over the years. It's a first-class organisation. They have been campaigning. It is a campaigning organisation fundamentally, but what this book is, it's a manual for action. It's basically trying to set out where we might be going in the future concerning some of the current issues which the planet faces. Now, obviously, there's got to be agreement by the various countries. You won't get agreement from some. You might get agreement from others when they're arguing about which chair they're going to sit in and all the other things. And I know you probably think I'm picking on something very irrelevant. This is the problem. Quite often when we're trying to get agreements on things, the main issues are not talked about because peripheral petty issues dominate the agenda. It happens in court when I'm doing cases quite often, and we have to get people back into the main stream of what we're doing. So this is what Elizabeth and I say. This short manual has been long overdue, and it sets out sensible and practical plans for action. The book has been rightly described as a vital one-stop resource for information on the prevention of torture. And we welcome it, of course, at a time when issues of torture and other ill treatment remain as some of the worst outrages upon the inherent dignity of the person. And we think that Amnesty International and certainly the author Deborah Long and others are to be congratulated for setting out this plan of action so clearly at a time when it's so desperately needed. And I think it's important to read the excellent foreword by Hawanda E. Mendez right at the beginning because he sets out the facts as you start to read the work. And I think that's really quite important. Now, you've probably heard these words about the issues of torture before. It doesn't have to be like this, and of course it doesn't. But still nothing seems to be done. Unfortunately, much of the evidence and publicity surrounding this appalling human behaviour lies ignored by the majority, which is why this book, in our view, is so important. Now, combating torture starts with the following premise that far from being a medieval practice eradicated in modern times, torture continues to thrive the world over, mostly in places where people are deprived of their liberty, but also elsewhere. And I point out there are a large number of countries which are totalitarian. And that's something, again, a lot of people who are, like we, living in the free world, in democracies, don't probably appreciate in quite the same way. But far too many, and we do try where we can to establish a rule of law and concepts of democracy and self-determination. Those are still principles which have run down the centuries, but we're still battling away, and that's the way it will be. Now, Long and the people involved in this book declare that nowhere are people totally free from the risk of torture and other ill treatment, whether directly by officials or through official complicity, inaction or failure. And it's for this reason that the Manual for Action is so important for politicians, scholars and academics. And of course it outlines the safeguards which exist within the principles of international law to protect people against torture. And the author gives us examples of successful campaigning techniques to put an end to torture, which frankly is probably the only way forward for the immediate future. And what we particularly liked was the coverage of the human rights standards that apply at every stage from arrest and detention to trial and imprisonment, which is an area of great importance to a wide readership from law students to criminologists. Because I think, in fact, this book is a good read for a very wide stretch of readers across the board. Politicians, of course, sociologists, criminologists, philosophers, in fact, as well. Possibly. I think probably they would find it quite interesting. They might learn something. The manual, of course, explains the key steps which governments and campaigners can take to stop torture and other ill treatment, although there's much work, in our view, still to be done because of the massive complacency, and it's international complacency from some of the big international organisations, which will not be named here. The importance of the manual, then, is to offer ideas for activism based on Amnesty's own tried and tested methods. Now, I'm not a great activist myself in that sense, but you can see that when they feel to bring things to people's attention, legally of course, it is actually one way of getting publicity for some of the worst ill treatment and torture matters. And we have tried. I mean, we've tried even in England and Wales and in the United Kingdom. And frankly, if the media are not interested, they do tend to get inured to some of the stories, and therefore we've got to sort of try to raise it. That's where the activism comes in. But it's a matter which government should take up, but don't hold your breath. That's the simple reality of it all. Now, what the author does is she covers the following contents in the book: an outline of the key steps that governments and campaigners can take to end heinous abuse of torture and other ill treatment, and it gives detailed information on legal safeguards, and it offers ideas for campaigning based on Amnesty's own tried and tested methods. Now, let me just conclude by saying that the work will be of use to the following people: anyone working to expose and combat torture and other ill treatment, including human rights defenders, lawyers, judges, law enforcement officers and other public officials, legislators, health professionals and the media. So you've got a wide group of people who can, and I'm sure will, continue to maintain this agenda item high on the agenda, because it's a matter which we can deal with, and frankly there are not that many excuses for the lack of action. Obviously corruption is one problem area because people are bribed, and there are lots of other difficulties concerning why some of these appalling practices are still allowed, apart from the use, of course, of brute force, militarist bullets and so forth, pure oppression. And of course, again, that's another main issue. As I say, I think that what I've just indicated covers a wide group, which is exactly the readership that I think Amnesty wishes to approach. So we do hope the book is read by them. And so I'd like to thank everybody at Amnesty for producing it, obviously Deborah and all the other people. I've only got her name, but I know that a lot of other people have been involved. The publication date is cited at 2016. There is the book again. It's a paperback, as I say. There's the spine, and then there's the back. You can see some information is on the back. Just opening it in the middle, we are looking here, the right to legal counsel. An interesting point, because again, the first step down the slippery slope, Mr. Tony Blair, is to start not allowing people to have a barrister, or not telling them what they're charged with. And it's this sort of behaviour which has got to be stopped. Safeguards on release. You can see there's a lot of detail at the bottom there concerning footnotes for further reading. Right at the front, I think the further reading is actually quite important. I think it's useful to get a feel for the detail that's actually in this work. I think it's a very good book, and I'm delighted that they were able to produce this new work for us, because this item is not going to go away, and Amnesty, more power to all of you for what you do, and thank you. Bye-bye.